success about appointments that we've had in this city is a whole lot more about you guys out there than it is about anything that's done up here. That success really reflects the depth of the talent and the willingness of the community to dedicate their time to the city and to stand through some of these things, to serve Poway. So it actually makes the vetting process kind of challenging, because you're not like selecting from just some bad people and a couple good ones. You're really trying to slice and dice the best from the best. So it is a little bit hard. And you and I, Hiram, may just disagree that it is the depth of talent in the community that's resulting. That's what the result of the success is. But we'll leave it at that for another time. I do want to move on to your petition, which I do think was a source of misinformation. That said, I will tell you this: I truly believe that everybody who signed that petition was sincere, and they did so thinking that that petition reflected reality. And the petition admittedly did change a number of times, and the calls for the petition, I watched that evolve. I think it was like 4 or 6 times or something like that. And I got to be honest, if I actually thought it represented reality, I might have signed it myself. Just actually an aside, quick ask to Hiram and anybody else doing petitions: don't dox the residents. Don't tie emails to primary residence and the name. That's a problem. Okay, so. But back to this. Now, it was clearly stated by several council members on December 3rd, including myself when you were in this room, that the main reason for choosing an appointment, if we're going to choose an appointment, over a special election was to ensure the immediate, timely, and competent representation for District 1, particularly when setting the water rates for the next 4 years. That was specifically mentioned then. It was also about the annual budget, getting that set, getting the capital improvement projects, taken care of, and a number of other things. To expand, this was like this. You can consider this to be a decision tree. You have the rightness, you have the want, and you have the cost. At issue was we were exiting the tree before the cost. So you could say like representation, informed interest, and maybe $300,000 for a full and proper election. I cannot say why the real drivers of this discussion were not listed on that petition. And this looks like a red herring of $300,000 popped up in some of those, kept getting mentioned. Now, to be fair, that is correct that $300,000 is a significant amount of money, and there would be some significant choices that would have to be made if we did that. And these choices were more severe than what Councilman Blaine alluded to with what I thought was a misrepresentation of the budget on social media, but we'll get into that later. The primary problem is that when people get spun up about the wrong thing, they don't make effective decisions. So I think people, if people were given a more balanced and neutral presentation, many might have chosen differently, perhaps favoring an appointment or not signing the petition at all. And I say think, not believe, because I sent out a newsletter to my D3 constituents. And within that newsletter, it contained a neutral presentation of this issue. And despite about a 25% overlap with the D3 signatories on that petition, 0 of them asked for an election of any kind. And that's actually pretty powerful, because there were people engaged in that newsletter. Don't get me wrong. There were issues, before that item, and there were issues they engaged with after that item. And so they were clearly reading it. And there was about 3,000 newsletters that were sent out. And actually, it was 5 people responded to that issue directly. And 3 of them actually wanted an election of those 5. And they were fully informed. And 2 of them preferred an appointment. One of them was kind of frustrated and said, I want an appointment. One was just, give me an appointment. And I think there was actually one more who wanted more information, but I think they also wanted the election. So this does show that when people are given a full set of facts and they have time to think about it on their own, while there may be a lot of interest in this issue, there's not a lot of support one way or another. We're talking, it's like a standard distribution curve, and we're talking people way out here in the outliers. We're talking multiple standard deviations away. There could be a lot of interest, but there's not a huge amount of decision on one side or the other. Actually, as an aside, more people are really interested in the water rates. I got a lot of comments on that. But in your opinion pieces, though, you mention Encinitas, and this is actually where it's more problematic. You mentioned Encinitas, Coronado, and Lemon Grove as cities where this process is controversial. And to be clear, this issue arises every election cycle, or nearly one, and there's plenty of established precedent in how people actually deal with them. So I'm going to read what you wrote. This is from the News Chieftain. You wrote a couple of them. I suspect they were similar. It says, Encinitas faced similar criticism, with residents calling out the city's history of serial appointments and the hypocrisy of newly elected officials reversing their campaign positions to support appointments. So last Thursday, I met with Luke Schaefer, who is Encinitas' new council member, because he's on the RISWA board, the Regional Solid Waste Association board. He was at this appointment meeting, and there was this very small discussion about appointments. It was mostly technical. And then I went to Encinitas' website, which is actually kind of hard to maneuver to get to the video, but I found it, and I actually found that person who was criticizing the hypocrisy on appointments. But what you left out was that he then proceeded to ask the council to do an appointment. He also listed that he has not had issues with the 5 or 6 or whatever it was number of appointments that he's seen there since he's been dealing with politics in Encinitas. And if you look at the same time period that he was talking about, we've had like 3, and they've got like, I don't know, I don't remember if it was 5 or 6. His issue was more about the hypocrisy, not about the appointments. And furthermore, I think this is the kicker. He spoke about how appointments make sense for terms less than 2 years. So let's take a little moment to unpack what we've just seen here, what just heard here. It took this story that tells one thing and sliced it up into little pieces, and it does something else. And it's a completely different story. And you know, it worked really well. The Coronado part, which is right here, it says, Coronado recently followed suit, opting for an appointment despite public outcry. So the Thursday before the RISWA meeting, I was at the Wastewater Joint Powers Authority meeting, another board I sit on, and I spoke with newly elected mayor of Coronado, John Duncan. I sat next to him. He's been on that board as long as I have. He's been on the board as a council member. He's a great guy. He's got great understanding of how to run a meeting. We had a short conversation about appointments, and then I looked at their meeting, and their council chamber is kind of small, looks weird, and they all wear suits. And you were right about the outcry. There was actually a line of people coming up to the dais to talk, but most of the people were speaking about wanting an appointment. And what they were talking about, they were citing reasons like avoiding the strife of consecutive elections and the fact that appointments are in the code for a reason. And that they're part of the electoral process, and that many officials in our state, including both of our federal senators, the Attorney General, the Secretary of State, these were all appointed. They mentioned council members all over the area that have been appointed over time. Oceanside apparently had 3 council members appointed, which should raise some red flags in somebody's head because you're not supposed to do that. People on the Metro JPA board that I sit on, apparently they were appointed. Now the thing is, what we do is we go through these cycles where we have elections where we get divided, and that's the natural state of an election. Then you have this process of healing where you come together, and then you perform legislation, and then the cycle repeats. So it just continues on and on through time. Because I guess it's sort of to paraphrase, maybe expand on what Thomas Jefferson said, it's so when we refresh the tree of liberty, it's not done with the blood of those patriots and tyrants. So you stir the pot a little bit, and then you heal. And in some respects, the appointment process is designed to get us back onto that cycle so we're not tearing each other apart with this continuous division of endless elections. Now, the option of a special election is certainly there as a backstop for the times when there's not a consensus on the board. But, like also mentioned at the Coronado City meeting, but definitely not in this opinion piece, is that special elections have a terrible turnout. and mail-in only elections are even worse. For them, they viewed this as a problem or as a bug. And I do have to wonder if there are people here who may view that as a feature of special elections that are mail-in. Finally, you mentioned Lemon Grove, where a similar debate is happening. I was physically there in their council chambers, which is their community center. I was there on January 6th, where they discussed this meeting, and I was speaking there about a very different appointment they were doing. Very nice people. They have a great city, this cool metro thing running by. I didn't see any lemon groves, though. Their staff did report, they cited a cost of about $450,000 or $460,000 for a special election, but it wasn't really discussed beyond the staff item. And the real concern they had was with filling the seat quickly for onboarding and sharing the workload, and how to advertise, how to do the candidate selection process, very technical stuff. But if you remember here, in December, I pushed for a very similar thing for similar reasons. I know the optics weren't great, but it was really just a technocratic thing to get somebody into the seat. So what I think we're all seeing here is that when I take a peek behind the stories or do the fact checking that most people don't want to do, reality does paint a very different picture than what's presented. And you know, but as they were presented by Hiram, they did feel good. I'm certain of that, because they aligned with the reader's perceptions. And this is called confirmation bias. And so even when faced with information that's new that I've just given you, that contradicts the narrative being told, even when it exposes misinformation or disinformation, it's difficult for people to change their minds. And this is called the consistency principle. And it's, you know, people will strive to find additional reasons to support their initial conclusions. So what I'm going to do is, I have a prop, and it actually is relevant to this, is I'm going to recommend that everybody here read this book. It's called Influence by Robert Cialdini. It goes into the techniques that marketers, con artists, and cults use to exploit confirmation bias, the consistency principle, and the reciprocity rules to induce people to action, people who are just like you guys. This is my daughter's copy, actually. I gave it to her so she could develop independent thinking skills and be better prepared for the world where tactics such as these are commonplace, and done by those who may not have their best interests at heart. Because while you guys may not have read this, it really does look like some of the people on social media have, from what I'm seeing. Now, one thing was mentioned here was there was passion on this issue, and I'm actually very glad that there's passion on this issue, because many of you didn't get the full story. I'm sure some of you did, and that's understandable, and that's cool. But I want you to imagine a situation where you only had Hiram's partial view and then stayed silent. I think that silence would be a far greater threat to our liberty than you guys speaking up here today with such passion. But I was saying that there's a problem with misinformation, and it cuts both ways. Because by acting like the driving issue did not exist because, I don't know, it was inconvenient or whatever, a choice was made to gather more signatures in exchange for denying the informed want, and that reduces the chance the message will be effective. I do try to treat people as individuals who can take the complete truth, even if it's long, and even if they don't want to hear it. And one of the several reasons I wrote that neutral item in my newsletter on this particular issue was to inform people about it and to judge their want on the issue. And as a bonus, the D3 overlap helps me actually estimate what that want is actually elsewhere. It's not perfect. But because the primary argument for an appointment is the benefit that comes from the fruits of representation, I was looking for some learned counterpoint. Like, who am I to stop people from walking off of a cliff if they demonstrate they know what the consequences are? But for the Times, perhaps they've been fed misinformation about gravity and think they can fly. I mean, so what I was looking for was some large number of District 1 residents coming up here and saying something to the effect of, I really don't care about having representation on my water rates for the next 4 years. I want a special election. Or how the budget gets allocated, how capital improvement projects are prioritized, or how any of the money is spent. It's okay if I don't have a voice. I want a special election. Or parks are my thing, development, whatever, staff can handle it. I don't need to have a say in that. I'm going to be at my computer. I know I want a special election, but I didn't hear that. Now, I will tell you this. The people who are in front of you have all been elected to this council in free, open, and fair elections. Everybody on this council has been initially elected to this council in regularly scheduled elections, and nobody on this council has at any time been appointed to this council. And the rate of appointments to this council does not appear to be unusual, except maybe it's a little bit unusually small, particularly when compared to other city councils and other water districts or water wards in the region. Now, as defined by the laws, codes, and practices, and more importantly, the practices of our democratically elected governing body in the state of California, the appointment method for filling vacancies is both permissible and commonplace from the very top all the way down. In fact, it actually would be highly unusual in a democratic institution or in a democratic institution of this size and type to actually call for a special election in this situation. So therefore, in following these laws and practices, which are by definition performing our role in our democracy, which is one we have here, I will move to utilize the appointment process to fill the announced vacancy for District 1 for this, in the city of Poway. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the applications in the order that they were submitted. And the first one is Peter Neild, and which is just, fantastic. I mean, you can't say anything bad about Peter. Really great community service. I've known of his work on Christmas Tree Lane for a long time, from when I was out here and when I was up, out there and up here. Very experienced in local politics. I've seen his cool election analytics, and that's kind of neat. He's run for council, been very engaged, former military, so that's great. I think he gets the system really well. I did see actually before that you had split your district up into small little pieces or areas of understanding, and I try to find commonality. But you have this really nuanced understanding of District 1. I think that's very powerful. I've seen you've had these ideas of this like Athenian style fully participatory democracy, which when I hear those, it's like two wolves and a lamb deciding on what's for lunch. But it's an interesting thing. But really big on listening, and I think that's great. It may not look like it, but actually up here we do a boatload of listening. I don't always, in the interest of time, I don't always talk a lot like this, and so it doesn't come across very well. It's just that the needs and wants of the community that we're really listening to are the underlying needs and wants of the community. Because sometimes there are very loud voices that call for I think you'd be able to pick that up pretty quick. So I do think you would, and actually I was thinking of Harmon Ranch when I was writing that. But I think you'd master that pretty quick. Let's see. Next on the list is Chris Pikus. Where's Chris? Oh, there he is. That is a really impressive resume. You have a law degree, engineering background, experience in a large corporation that gives you solid insight into civilian budgets, which is important. Impeccable moral character. You've been on the BRC, and that you have a deep understanding of the budget process and other aspects of the government side of what makes Poway tick. And there's a government side, and there's the side that's you guys. It's not all just one thing. Honestly, this does give Chris a little bit of a leg up because this whole process has taken longer, not entirely because of my speech, but because we delayed it since December, and we're a month into this. But it's not everything. And Greg Brandelis, I've spoken with Greg before about the trails on Twin Peaks Mountain, and I will tell you this: if you have ever hiked the trails on if you ever hiked up Twin Peaks, there is almost certain that you are hiking on a trail that he built. I know someone said you haven't seen him around. He is out there at like 4 in the morning working on trails every day. And and so he really understands open space. And if you're up there, I want you to just think of him when you're up there, but don't think of him too much that you miss the rattlesnakes, because there are rattlesnakes up there too, and I don't want you getting hurt. But he's very strong on parks, as you've heard. I think he really gets that. He's got some good vision on businesses. He's been doing that